Welcome to the Salience Podcast, where we identify what stands out from all the noise.
Today on the Salience Podcast, we explore the benefits and pitfalls of role clarity. I'm especially interested in one of the most ambiguous roles, that of Chief of Staff, a relatively new addition to the more usual members of the C-suite. Our guest today is David Hesse, who until recently was Chief of Staff at Kitman Labs. David announced his departure on LinkedIn, and he posted a really insightful article on the role of Chief of Staff. I thought his insights would be of interest to our listeners, and it's a great opportunity for me to connect with David again. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you so much for the opportunity to chat today.
Before we really explore the boundaries of roles and this thing called Chief of Staff, I'd like to know a little bit more about your own journey before you took up your most recent position, before you became a Chief of Staff. You know, what's the journey for a person who becomes a Chief of Staff?
Ian, let me start off by saying that we were at the same university at the same time, although we didn't actually know one another. And I don't know if you knew that. So I'm a psychologist by education and training, and I first studied psychology at University of Edinburgh. And then I specialised in organisational psychology. And then after leaving university, I decided to go down the corporate route, and I joined Ernst & Young in management consulting. So I kind of left the psychology behind, well, in a formal capacity, joined the graduate training, went into management consulting. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot, but I also learned that wasn't where my passion was, albeit it took me 8 years to figure that out. So in my early 30s, I decided to pivot, change careers, and I returned to the world of psychology again. But this time I went and did sports psychology, and I went back to university for a third time and retrained. And as a result of that, I started to work with coaches and athletes on the mental side of their game. Now, that career change then ultimately to Florida in America, where I went to work for IMG Academy. IMG Academy is a global powerhouse of youth development and youth sport. And I was very, very fortunate. 10 phenomenal years with IMG Academy. And again, I feel so grateful and blessed for all the opportunity I was given over there. I ended up becoming part of the senior leadership team, and great 10 years. We really have high, I couldn't say anything bad about that time. Then after COVID, like so many of us, I took stock. And I took stock of my life, my career. And I'd been away from my native home, which is Scotland. I've been away for about 25 years. And I decided, for family reasons, I wanted to go back to Scotland. So I decided to pack my bags, leave the US. And again, feel incredibly fortunate with timing, because at that moment in time, I was given an offer, a chance to join Kitman Labs. And Kitman Labs are a software company in data analytics, work for and specialise in providing solutions for high-performance organisations, predominantly in sport and military. And that's where I did my stint as Chief of Staff, the topic I want to discuss today. And as you said, I recently left that role and now work for myself. I'm working with a number of clients on some consultancy work, mainly in high performance again, helping organisations through business transformation and change. So that's me.
Yeah, fantastic. I knew we'd both been to Edinburgh. I didn't realise it was at the same time.
Same time. You were, I only know this on LinkedIn, so in case you were to get that was stalker. You were a year above me. Ironically, but there might not be irony, actually, coincidentally, both my housemates, flatmates, studied the same course as you did, and they were a year.
Oh, wow. Oh, fantastic.
It's a small world.
Edinburgh's just a magnificent place to live. I love living in Edinburgh and love Scotland.
Yeah. You're preaching to the choir, but yeah.
So really interesting, into psychology, the management consulting, then that focus on the sports side and sort of back out. COVID is a catalyst. And I think for so many people, like you say, it enabled people to take stock. And this chief of staff role, Was that the way the job was advertised, or did you shape that job?
No, it wasn't advertised. I'd actually joined in another position, and then it evolved, and both the CEO and myself thought it was an opportunity for me to do something, to step up and contribute to the company in a different way. So I was already with the company in a different role, and the role was kind of created for me, with me, by me, in conjunction with the chief executive at the time.
Yeah, before we go into that process, because I think that probably occurs quite a lot with that role.
I think so, yeah.
And I think that's a really good way to co-design that particular role in a business. Tell me, what is chief of staff? What is it?
Yeah, I mean, well, before, I think to give some context, I mean, you in the LinkedIn article, I think it's important I just gave you a brief overview. I have worked with the chief of staff, an outstanding chief of staff, when I was at IMG Academy. So I had a very good role model, and I've been a chief of staff in a software company. But I wouldn't want to make sure there's many, many people who are much more experts and knowledgeable than me. And again, you're going to hear this throughout, particularly in the US. It's a much more established career path. The Harvard Business School have got a chief of staff training program. There's a chief of staff association. So I think the way it piqued your interest was a combination of doing the role in the UK, experiencing it in the US, and then as I speaking to more and more founders, CEOs in the UK, it was more an observation of what I was seeing. So I give that context as just sort of a caveat I'm about to say. The simple answer is the chief of staff depends on who you ask and in the company you work. Now, that doesn't really help you because it's so vague and glib. In my opinion, the chief of staff is a supporting role that if you do it properly, you're helping a senior executive. Often it's a CEO, doesn't have to be. And what your role is to do is to unleash them to focus on the things they're brilliant at and help them do their job more effectively. And you do that by taking some of the bottlenecks, some of the tasks, some of the opportunities that's on their plate that they can hand off to you. But it's a strategical role as opposed to a tactical role for the most part. As I mentioned, it doesn't have to be a CEO. In smaller companies, it tends to be the chief executive officer or the founder. But in the larger companies, you can have multiple chief of staffs. And if that's the case, then you're working with a divisional head, or you could be working with another one of the executive team, take your pick, CFO, chief technology officer, chief marketing officer. They could all have chief of staffs. Again, because the role is to free up that individual so they can maximize their impact. So initial answer is broad and generic, because as you said in the opening, it's an ambiguous role, much more ambiguous than any other C-suite role currently. If you come from a military background or political background, you have a very clear idea, a very clear expectation what the role is. But certainly in the UK market, in startups, venture-backed companies, smaller growth companies, you're seeing increasingly a number of chief of staff positions. And it's very different to that political or military role. And unlike other C-suite roles like CFO, CEO, Chief Operating Officer role, you can assume there's quite a lot of consistency between. If you're a CFO and you go from company to company, you can assume it's fairly structured. There's quite a lot of consistency. Chief of staff, take your pick. It will vary significantly between company to company, often executive to executive. And that could be both an opportunity and a risk to folk. So, generalist role, supporting others, be successful, broad remit. Often, there is a strategical component to it, but you also have to be able to get your hands dirty.
Yeah, and I think it's this flexibility and ambiguity that I'm attracted to, because so many organizations are really quite complex in what they're trying to achieve. And you've got this C-suite made up of the senior people in the business, but there's invariably gaps. There are things where you want better connectivity between the different roles. And for some of them, There'll be, I like the way you said it's a strategic role, but it's about relieving bottlenecks. It's about freeing people up. And I think that just sounds like having one role in a team, whether it's the C-suite or in fact most teams, having that flexibility is going to give you an enormous strategic advantage.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I often would use the political analogy. You're a minister without a portfolio. So you're part of the executive team. You're very much focused on the executive team performance. You're very much focused, and then you have to match your skill, your knowledge, your competencies, and understand where you can make an impact. And you also got to be careful to read the room and not overstep the mark, and get too ahead of yourself, and think every problem is your problem to solve. So there's flexibility, adaptability. These are all absolutely appropriate for the role, and you have to have a pretty good degree of self-awareness, and you have to have a pretty good way of the organizational awareness to be able to know when to step in, know when to back off, know when to lead, know when to support.
I've got 3 questions that have come up immediately out of what you've just said. The first one is, what's an example of the sort of bottleneck that you've been able to unblock that has freed up an organization? What's an example?
So an example of the bottleneck is organizations, teams, people get into the habit of always wanting the CEO's blessing, approval, input into every decision. And that's fine when you're a small company, but when you're growing and scaling, that's not feasible for the chief executive officer, the CEO, because they can't be in every meeting. They've got their day job. They've got loads of other different pressures, whether it be investors and clients and educating the market. And it just as an organization is bigger and try to do more things on more fronts for more clients, it's not feasible. So if you understand the intent, the direction, the intent on what the CEO or the executive team need and want, if you understand the strategy of the organization, you can represent those individuals in the meeting. You can provide that perspective, which means decisions can get made quicker. More decisions on a quicker basis can get made done. The other thing, though, is also, to get much more specific, I got very, very hands-on in conjunction with my colleagues on building, coaching, and leading a management community, as in the execution of that have to happen. That'll free the CEO to be much more strategical. That allow the CEO to be focused, as I said, all those external, the market, educating the market, and working on the clients. And myself and some of the executive team are much more focused on building internal capability. And again, it's a division of labor that you have to have as you go through certain inflection points of an organization as you grow and you go through certain thresholds, where it be go from 50 people to 80 people, 80 people to 120, whatever it may be, those different thresholds. So, if you want your CEO to do everything, then it's very quickly that become overwhelmed. And it's the same for all the executive team, actually. So it's about freeing up people so you can scale the business. You can do more to the same level of quality across more markets and more clients.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. Biggest challenge of every CEO I've ever spoken to is that tension between working in the business and working on it, and never having enough time to work on it.
Yeah, I think that's a bit apt way of putting it.
You said 2 other really important points. First one is, you said you've got to be able to read the room, know when to step in and lead, know when to make sure that you're not treading on other people's toes or their roles. Tell me, what have you seen or what have you heard that would be a tip for how to read the room?
Yeah, I'm so glad I introduced that concept now you ask me. Well, what does read the room mean? Read the room is to have an awareness of the different factors at play, understand both the organizational context, the company goals, the strategy, what we're trying to achieve collectively, and then also combine that with individual needs, wants, and desires. So in order to read the room, you have to have good context, see the meeting, the occasion, the project in light of the bigger picture, what we're trying to achieve, where we're trying to get to, and also understand the individuals within the room, or whether it be the room, it could be the call, whatever it may be. So it's it's being able to combine your knowledge of the company, the project, clients, the people, and also making a decision: how hard do we need to push to get an outcome right now, and what are we prepared to put on the side for the time being, whether it be today, this week, this month, to revisit. So knowing when to demand or push for or expect an outcome, and knowing also when to just allow people their own space to figure things out. So to answer your question, I think you have to understand the context, the people, what's important, why is it important to people, and then figure out whether you're going to be very proactive. So sometimes you are expected to drive a result, and other times you need to be more of a diplomat and just back off. And sometimes you get much effective having a one-to-one conversations with people and protecting them, whether it be their ego, their reputation, or just helping them out. So it's just having that ability. And you draw an experience. I was part of an executive team. I had a functional role. I had a functional set of responsibilities. I had a very specific remit. And once you've done that, you understand the different pressures, expectations of the different leaders. And if you can relate to them, it gives you a much better chance of being able to influence them.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there I really liked earlier. You talked about the importance of really understanding the intent. So this is not the level of a goal or a task now. It's understanding that purpose, that higher level strategic intent. And what I'm hearing here is this relationship between the systems of business and how you're doing what you're doing, and the strategic aims, and then the individuals and how they all come together to execute on that and make decisions.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You said the word intent. More often than not, if you're part of that executive level, you have a voice and you're certainly aware of the wider company goals. If you're doing your normal strategy planning, you have that awareness. Company goal is sometimes discussed, but very often it's not. But if you understand the tactics, the company goals you're trying to achieve, you can either remind your fellow colleagues and leaders in the business, where does this sit in relation to these company goals, or you can use the company goal reference point for that one-to-one to sort of say, remember what we're trying to work towards. Is this moving us closer? So yeah, the intent, I'd use the intent manifests itself in agreed company strategic objectives that the executive team all have been part of delivering. And if it's a shared understanding, a shared common goal, it's much both. You've all got a reference point to what you're working towards.
Yeah, I like this idea of shared common purpose. And in there, this is the third part I wanted to get to. You talked about bottlenecks and freeing up. You talked about reading the room. And then you said it's also important to have self-awareness. What aspect of self-awareness do you have that's serving you well? It could be a bias that you hold in check. It could be something that you're aware of that enables you to make decisions. What part of self-awareness is important to you?
Great question. I think I'll answer this question this way. If you're chief of staff, you have to be comfortable. You have to manage your ego. Yeah, because it's not about you. It's not like you, and you have to be comfortable allowing others to shine and be successful. So the self-awareness there is understanding your own motivations, your own desires, your own need, and how you evaluate a job well done. So I suppose it comes to ego management and being comfortable to know that often your job is to be in the background. And often, I use an example. I don't know if this is a good example, but if you're in sport and you have a good referee, they say you don't notice a good referee because they manage the game, and you're not the only time you notice a referee is when they make a mistake. Bad analogy, but chief of staff's often like that, which is you don't really notice the chief of staff they're doing the job effectively because other people are doing their job and they're shining. That's a great chief of staff. And I suppose then self-awareness is understanding what your motivations are, what you need from the role, and how you evaluate a job well done. and not needing that necessarily at that recognition to know that you're having an impact.
Yeah, that's a fantastic segue into something you wrote about in your article. And you talked about some of the boundaries of what is and is not a chief of staff. And you also talked about some of the pitfalls to look out for, like particularly when the chief of staff starts to compete with the CEO or the founder, or they seek power. What have you seen there out in the world? What kind of things have you seen that lead you to that awareness? Because certainly I'm aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I had a phenomenal role model at IMG Academy, the chief of staff, and then I've done chief of staff, and hopefully neither of us have competed with the CEO or the founder. And the reason I say that is because I think it's less likely for a chief of staff, a smart chief of staff, to compete with the CEO, because ultimately that's a career limiting move. I mean, you have to understand where the power lies there. But I also understand it's absolutely possible for people in the chief of staff role to get out over their skis. And the reason for that is because there's a large degree of autonomy in the role. You're not getting micromanaged. You're expected to be dealing in issues of strategy. You're expected to be dealing with areas of influence. And if you're unclear on what the boundaries are, it's absolutely feasible for you to potentially step into areas or make decisions or be speaking on behalf of the CEO when you're extending the limit of influence. However, a good CEO will stop that out. A good CEO will give you the guardrails to make sure that doesn't happen. And if it does happen, we'll have a chat about it. So I think it's unlikely, in my experience, again, I sort of like to actually compete, to have a power play, to be some sort of Machiavellian or Succession-like power play with the CEO. I do think there's role ambiguity and the opportunity to bump heads with other executives. And the main one is probably the chief operating officer, the CEO, or the ops director, if you're here in the UK. And that's because the nature of the job. The nature of the job is you're a generalist, number one. To your visibility of the entire organization or department, if it's a big department. And number three, ultimately your job is to get things done. Now, a lot of time you're working through others, and some of the time you have to roll your sleeve up, but you're interested in, at the end of the day, efficiency and effectiveness. So it's in that, when you start to bring in those sets of conditions, it's easy to bump heads with the ops team, because kind of that's what their job is as well. They're responsible for the core processes, how the business executes, who's doing what. So if you're not aware of what you're doing, you're not aware of what others are doing, then you can bump heads, you can step on toes unintentionally. And then as you alluded to, the other area you can unintentionally bump heads with is an executive assistant. And the reason for that, as I said at the beginning, your job is to help free up another member of the executive team, for the most part. Could be the CEO. And what you're doing is freeing up their time to maximize their productivity so they can spend time on high value activities and they can have the biggest impact for the entire organization. And sometimes that means you're getting into tactics. Sometimes that means you're getting into potentially the day-to-day activities. And if you do that consistently, you will bump heads with an executive assistant, because that's really what their role is. Their role is really, really focused on that executive and making sure that their day is highly structured and their day is highly efficient. Again, from experience, a good EA, whatever style they have, will either kindly tap you on the shoulder or they'll tell you otherwise, that you're now getting too immersed in the details and you need you to back off a little bit. The role ambiguity is great if you're a journalist and you want to do that, you want to have a free reign, but it has a downside, and that downside is you can unintentionally, if you have blind spots, walk yourself into other people's territory and ruffle some feathers.
Yeah, interesting. I see some parallels there, even in some of the consulting aspects of the work that we might do. So even as an external, we might go in, we support a client, mostly with the strategic, with the training. You talked about bringing their management team along and coaching. It's kind of what we do. And then there's just occasions where you see a need to support tactically. It could be something in the moment where the CEO or the chief, whichever label, they're just overwhelmed. They're not really able to shine. They're not able to do their job. And you say, hey, would you like a hand here? I can write that for you. I can do this for you. I can come in. I can host this. You turn up. This is where we need you. 30 minutes. You do your piece. And it's not common, but it's pretty amazing when you see it, and you're able to sort of step in and do that.
Yeah, and I think that's right. They said there's some execs that are overwhelmed. People all have different skills, knowledge, experience, strengths. So you can have a task, and I'll give you a task. End of year performance reviews. Some execs get overwhelmed at that because it's just not what they're good at. It's not what they enjoy. It's just not their thing. And there's other execs that you don't actually even need to ask them because they know they got them under control. A good chief of staff understands where and when they can lean in. So if you have that knowledge and you know that you've got your views coming up, and you know some execs is not necessarily their natural area of strength, you can early intervene, support, remind, coach, guide them in any way possible, which is, hey, in 6 months' time, all this has to be done. Have you had your interim check-in? Where are we at with these types of things? And you do it in a way that it's non-confrontational. You do it in a way that no one else knows you're having that conversation. Well, what you're doing is making sure they don't fail, because their boss is your boss and it's chief executive, and you want them to make sure that they thrive and they succeed. So execs do get overwhelmed, but they get overwhelmed at different things, and because we're all individual.
Yeah, I think it's enormously insightful, and I love that statement. It's all about making sure that they don't fail. It's everybody thrives together, and supporting the chief when they might have lots of different things. I liked as well the way that you described how idiosyncratic they can be. Some people are naturally good at certain things, but if there's a gap, that might be an opportunity to step in and help. I wonder, have you come across in your experience or heard about within that cohort where founders or CEOs exploit the chief of staff and don't really, I guess the right word might be treasure the value that they bring?
Well, I'd answer that two ways. The first part of that is no. I've been very, very fortunate with the leaders I've worked with, the companies I've worked with, the teams that I've been with, that the chief of staff has always been a highly valued, highly respected opportunity. So, and I feel very, like my relationship with my former CEO, a treasurer, he was brilliant for me. So my personal experience is very positive. What I'm seeing, but the reason that I wrote the article, I think what you're getting at is, I think that it is a misunderstanding or lack of awareness. But I think it's, and I've been naive, well, it's certainly not in my experience. I think it's less a case of it's not a case of exploitation. I think it's more of a case of not knowing how to maximize the use or the potential of chief of staff. So I think it's lack of awareness, not necessarily an intentional manipulation or exploitation, particularly if it's a first-time appointment. And some of the founders and some of the CEOs and some of the investors I've spoken to who are looking for this, it is a first-time appointment. And that's what prompted me to write the article, actually, because as I said to you, I had the conversation, I had something like this, and it was verbal, and the person said, you need to write that down, which is where I got to. But when I've spoken to founders and CEOs, and particularly in the UK, like before coming on this podcast today, I just out of interest went onto LinkedIn, great source of jobs. And today's Tuesday, and since Monday, yesterday, there's 12 new chief of staff posts that have been advertised in the UK. Obviously, it's a big market, but 12 posts that I saw. If you look at the job descriptions, there's great variance in each one of those. There's very little standardization across those. And that's why my experience told me as well. I saw great variance when I spoke to the CEOs and founders and what they were looking for. Yes, they all want shared outcomes. They all want to grow. They all want to scale, or they all want to lead better and free themselves up. But what my experience, and again, it's only my experience, is they're starting with the job title first and then defining the job requirements, as opposed to the other way around. What do you need? Why do you need it? What needs done? What are the tasks? What are the responsibilities? And once you've figured that out, then what is the appropriate terminology? What's the appropriate title? So I would advocate it's a case some occasions. So you said I don't think, and maybe I'm being naive. I've not, in my experience, ever been exploited. I don't think it's a case of exploitation. I think it's a case of experience and awareness of how to maximize the position.
Yeah, what a great articulation. So imagine that you are a super chief of staff. You're the one that goes around and helps other founders or CEOs choose chief of staff employees for their businesses. What question would you ask at interview? What's a killer question you'd ask of the chief of staff to tease out the qualities you're looking for?
Well, first of all, thank you in this imaginary scenario that I'm a super chief of staff. Okay, I'd go very practical. Just following what I just said, I'd be very, very practical. It's not inspirational in the slightest. My first question would be, do you understand the job requirements? So let's assume that the company, the team have done a good job in defining what the requirements is. I would be very literal and say, do you understand what we're asking for? And there's alignment between what we need and what you're looking for. So it's again, very functional, very practical. I would be asking them to forget the job title. I'll come back to that, but forget the job title. Do you understand what we need here, and are you on board with that? That's the first question. So literally explore them, their experience, their background, their capability to perform the functions you need. That's based on the assumption that you've done your due diligence and defined the job properly. Second part, once you've had a conversation about job requirements, I'm going to come back to the title. I want to explore candidates' motivation. And the reason I say that is because the first word of the title is chief. It's the C word, and it makes you part of the C-suite, a very alluring, a very desirable place to be in an organization is to be part of that C-suite. And many people are attracted to that, a chief of staff. And I'd want to explore what your motivation is. I'd like to understand, is it because of the title, or is it because you can have an impact? What is it? And I understand it's a big deal. It's a big deal to be part of CC. I totally get it. But in my experience, the chief of staff, I wouldn't say in every company and every role, the chief of staff is a true C-suite member. Now, that could be special. Yes, it definitely is in some roles. I was very fortunate in my opportunity I was given. I was part of the executive team. But the reality of it is, there's a model in some companies for the chief of staff to be a high potential person who they're putting into that chief of staff role because they've got high potential. And really what they're doing is it's kind of an on-job MBA in many respects. They're giving them the exposure, the experience, the knowledge, the insight of the company because they are tipped to move into a divisional lead role in the future. So it could be a 2-year stint. What that means is that person often doesn't have the depth of experience or the current capabilities of some of the other, pick your choice, CFO, CMO, Chief Delivery Officer, Chief Product Officer, whatever it may be. So really what I'm trying to say there is, first question is, you understand the job. Second question is, why do you want to do the job? So a bit motivation. And I'm really probing on, if we didn't call this Chief of Staff, if we called this something different, would you still want the role?
Yeah, really nice separation between the title and the impact that they can have across the team. I'm interested in culture in these high performing teams, and it strikes me that in some ways the chief of staff could be more influential on culture than the CEO even. They've got that connectivity right across the team. They can work behind the scenes. What kind of culture changes or interventions do you think are particularly important in the C-suite, and how could the chief of staff contribute to that?
I wouldn't necessarily say they're more influential. I think they play different roles. I think the CEO is very much very, very vocal, very, very visible in setting the standards and not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. I think the chief of staff and others have to reinforce, hold people accountable to the standards. So I think they're both moving towards the same outcome, but they may play slightly different roles in doing that. And, you know, metaphorically, when, and I'll use the one, you know, when the chief executive's not in the room, what are you doing to ensure that others are you know, working towards that culture that we've all agreed is important? Well, just a question, like, what are it's about the cultural initiatives? Can you remind me again, Elaine?
Yeah, what aspects of culture do you think are important in the C-suite? And the reason I make the distinction between the CEO and the chief of staff is that sometimes it's difficult for people to hold the chief executive officer accountable for their behaviour. And it can be this sort of role, I think, can nudge and remind and take aside and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing, you know, this is perhaps an area you might need to tone down or amplify some of your own behaviours. So I think this role could be a fantastic moderator for the chief executive. And I'm wondering what kind of things do you think are most important for that behaviour, for culture and behaviour and performance in the C-suite?
You're very much in the world of influence in the chief of staff, and you have that ability to influence. We talked earlier on about reading the room, and good degree of self-awareness, and matching what you can do and say and impact with the individual you're working with. And I'll use the entire executive team, not just the CEO. There are some people that you know because of your relationship with them, or because of who they are, or because of what you bring to the table. You can sit down, have a very honest, direct conversation. You can start the conversation with a qualifier to say, listen, you know I want what's best for all of us. And therefore you set a qualifier, and then you can give them some feedback. And you know that you can do that. There's other people that you either don't have a relationship with, or particularly as we're remote now, the relationship you have is on a virtual level, and that's going to be a very challenging conversation. But what you do know is other people that can land that message with that individual. So you can then go to that other person and say, hey, I am seeing X, Y, and Z. We need to give the feedback here and see whether that person can buy into what we're trying to achieve. Are you comfortable in having that conversation, or how do you think we should tackle this? You've got different tools in your armory. Sometimes you can go to the CEO, if it's not the CEO, by the way, who's the issue, and say, here, we've got a challenge. Can you resolve it? Can you help us here? That CEO will probably ask, what have you done so far? So you better have tried a couple of things, or you can say, this is what I'm done. If it is the CEO, and you don't feel you have that relationship, that if you feel as a chief of staff or you're concerned, you're the CEO is a leader. And by definition, a leader, they have followers. And that means there's a relationship. So they do have established relationships that you can leverage to try to see if you can land that message. And a good CEO will surround themselves with people who will be checks and balances, who will have the ability to speak up. Now, again, often it's done in a way that's non-confrontational, that you're not going to impact the perception, the credibility of that. You're not going to do it publicly. That's a career-limiting move. The conversations you have one-on-one is where you have that that influence. And again, it speaks to that role of doing things in the background, of shaping, of influencing, and not looking for the credit for doing it.
Yeah, we've come back to those interpersonal skills, haven't we? Highly refined interpersonal skills of reading the room, being self-aware, managing your own ego, working with influences. You know, it's quite a subtle role. You know, if I summarize some of those points that you've made, these salient points, it's using those interpersonal skills to connect with the intent of the business. You talked about freeing up the CEO or other members of the C-suite, removing those bottlenecks, allowing them to focus on the internal, or you're able to focus on the internal, which allows them to focus outwards, focus on the business as a whole. And I think one other thing I really took away was the the importance of getting the function right first and then design the role based upon the functions that you need, the gap analysis, I guess, if you like. Now, we've talked a little bit about this role within a particular company, and we've talked about your experiences there, and you've recently left this position and you're going out on your own now. So just doing that role for you, stepping back, thinking about influence and thinking about the world, what's important to you, more broadly? If you could direct attention in the world somewhere to something, what would it be?
If I could direct people's attention to something in the world, Ian, that's a big question. How do you answer that without getting political or saying something controversial?
Well, that's why I ask it.
Yeah, I know. Well, this is going to sound like a commercial, an advert for what you do. It's not intentional, but hopefully, if you allow me, I'll explain it. I would say something that's really important to me is investing in your own mental health, your own mental being, your own mental welfare. And what I mean by that is, it's timely, but there's a lot going on in the world right now. There's some seismic shifts, geopolitics, and world conflicts. We're definitely not going to get into it right now in this podcast. But what I would say, I'm based here in the UK and Scotland, and these things are not happening on my back. I would say that these events have impacted my well-being and how I perceive life. And the reason I say that, I think you know this, is I've studied a lot of psychology. I've studied a lot how the mind works. I study a lot how we think. What I'm saying is I know the tools. I know the strategies. I know the kit for thinking about how external events can impact your state internal, the way you think. And I know all those different things, and yet, unconsciously, these events have an impact on me over the last couple of weeks. So even with all that knowledge and all that training, resilience, your coping skills, they have to continually be refined. Now, given this is a Salience podcast, I probably assume that I'm preaching to the choir. But yeah, you asked me the question, what did I direct people's attention to? And I suppose I say, even despite all that training, all that knowledge, all that awareness, external events, I can definitely trigger in me an internal response. And if I let that fester, that can snowball.
Absolutely. And I think there's this circles back to something you said about self-awareness. If you're not aware that the external context is changing and you don't prepare for that, then that's not at all resilient. Pretending that there are not seismic shifts happening in the world right now is probably quite naive. So I really endorse your statement there. Be aware of the shifting context and think about protecting yourself and your family and your community and your friends. And very challenging times for lots of people.
Just to build on that, I think the word that stands out to me is the preparation, and I don't think I have, is proactive and reactive. And again, I should know better because I've done all the training. But it's the proactive approach. It's the scenario-based training. Happens. What will we do to cope with that? As opposed to when this happens, then let's deal with it then. And I actually concur with that. It's the preparation side. And maybe that's a bit of a nudge, a bit of a reminder for me to sharpen up my tools.
Yeah, I had a very similar nudge recently with the passing of my mum. She died a couple of months ago, and it just prior to that, she was very, very unwell, and I could not focus. So it was really distracting. And after her passing, I went to the funeral, gave the wake, and it was just an incredible relief to have the clarity back at that moment, and then be able to take stock on the decisions and the choices that I was making, and make some choices to lighten things in life, to create freedom in certain areas. Because of course, if you're fully trapped with every day of every moment taken, you don't really have much room to do differently and to adapt and to respond or to be proactive. If you're constantly in a reactive mode, you can't do anything to prepare for uncertainty or the future. So tell one last question. What are some of the sort of future aspirations, and what's this new flavor that you're into? What are you hoping to do? What's the future?
Well, the new flavor. So, okay. Well, I kind of mentioned at the beginning, I've been incredibly grateful, incredibly fortunate with the opportunities I've had. I spent a large portion of my career working in really exciting high-performance organizations, often taking me away for the best part of my working career, away from where I grew up. And just going back to your last comment, one, I'm really truly sorry for your loss. And two, I can relate to that because unfortunately I'm in a very similar situation to you. I lost my mother this year as well. And it was actually, that was the incentive for me to come back home. And I'm very, very grateful for the 2 or 3 years we had together when I came back on. And you can't get that time back. And I'm very grateful for that. But I've really enjoyed over the last couple of years reacquainting myself with my friends, my family, and all the places I actually took for granted when I was younger, living in this country. But the reality of it is I live in quite a small market, quite a small country. And it's quite a small market for the concept of high, true elite performance. The reality of it is there's just few opportunities. But it's a trade-off. And I know where you live, and it's, you have a bigger market and probably a bigger reputation for high performance than we do here. But my aspirations, I suppose, to answer your question, is to figure out how I can have the best of both worlds. How do I combine the highs and the intellectual curiosity and intrigue you get from working in interesting, unique, elite high-performance organizations, whether that be in sport, military, or the corporate life, but also then allows me to combine that with the beauty of living here in Scotland, and also allows me to work my golf handicap. So those are my aspirations. How do I combine those things that I want to do? You mentioned the word, I think, co-design. How do I co-design or create that life that I feel that gives me the things that I want? And it's an interesting intellectual challenge that I'm relishing at this moment in time. And again, I feel very, very grateful for my network and for the people I've worked with and for, because it's really set me up to give me a really strong foundation to try and achieve that.
Yeah, what a fantastic point to end our conversation today. That's definitely the note to end on, which is, co-designing your own life, the work that you do, the place that you live, family, friends, how you spend your time, who you spend your time with. Thanks so much for the conversation today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Salience Podcast. Please leave us a review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to the Frontline Mind newsletter by visiting our website at frontlinemind.com. Have you got a topic you would like some more salience on? Send us a message on LinkedIn or email team@frontlinemind.com.